Good afternoon. My name is Natalie Gonzalez. I am accessibility technician in the ENG Foundation. And we are going to talk about our project, what it means for our users, and we are going to explain the minimum accessibility features that one of these devices needs to comply with, regardless of our capacities or impairments. For the sake of time, we are going to explain just one part of this A-Mobile project, or A-Mobile, and the methodology. From the next week onwards, we will upload the entire lecture on our website in English and Spanish. All in all, this A-Mobile project is a website. It's a virtual browser that allows users to find accessible smartphones that can meet their needs and preferences, and that can be used with support material. This website is for people with impairments, but also for the elderly people, and anyone can actually use it. It is also aimed at mobile manufacturers, developers, and experts in the field of accessibility. The leading goal of A-Mobile is to set up support networks and update all the know-how available. A-Mobile is a project led by the ENG Foundation, developed by TechnoSite, with the support and sponsorship of the Vodafone Foundation here in Spain. We also have users that cooperate with us and are volunteers providing their help. How do we use A-Mobile? It is very simple. You can only access the website. The users also have the possibility to browse and use the browsers to the right, or you can click on the Assistance tab. So if you click on this tab, you will select the profile that best suits you. For example, for me, it would be partial hearing impairment. You can then choose the functionalities you'd like for your mobile phone. This is not mandatory. You can leave it blank if you wish. And then you can look for accessible mobile devices. The browser will provide you with a list of mobile phones matching the selected profile. When you click on every single smartphone, you can take a look at the display of the functionalities. For example, Bluetooth connectivity, Wi-Fi connection, type of screen. And if you scroll down, you'll be able to see the accessibility features which are essential for that selected profile, as well as additional features that will improve customer experience. And finally, those are the accessibility barriers and the support tools that can be used with the mobile phone. In A-Mobile, we work with 3 different profiles of impairments. We are very general in our approach because impairments are a complex issue. Every single individual is different, and that is the reason why it is important to count on the feedback of those with impairments. In terms of visual impairment, so those completely blind are included, those who are too dependent on tactile and hearing assistance, and those who are partially blind. But in terms of technologies, they might have difficulties to read small typography. And finally, hearing loss. For example, well, two types of hearing impairment: those completely deaf, those with complete hearing loss, even if amplified, they can't hear anything, and those with complete hearing loss, they can listen to some sounds, although they might need a certain amplification, but and then people with physical impairment and also motor disabilities or hand disabilities. For example, users that can't move their hands around properly, the arms. They might do slow movements, shivering, and a lack of strength to lift a heavy weight or pick up a mobile phone. And then severe difficulty users, for example, those with a limb and who lacked in an arm or a leg, and users with some difficulties to understand abstract language, people with memory loss, for example. The elderly might be comprised here. Now, mobile phones analysis. Before we analyze a mobile phone, we need to take all the devices into account, both the hardware and the software. So the physical part and the virtual part. In a mobile, we use a specific methodology with different guidelines and standards that comply with the general principles of accessible principles. So here we're talking about the visual part of this smartphone. But how about the sound information and the physical information and the user friendliness to read messages, to understand smileys, and so on? First and foremost, we are going to talk about interactive sound interaction. For example, if we receive a smiley when there is an incoming call, an inbound call, or for example, one SMS, the icon that you can see there.
Hay un sobre en la parte superior izquierda del móvil.
In the upper left part, there is an envelope, meaning you have an unread email in your mailbox. You might receive also a sound alert and a light alert. Those who are not too familiar with this, one notification is one thing and one alert is another. The alert comes in when, for example, the telephone sounds when there is an inbound call. The notification is saying you have a missed call or an unread SMS. Truth is that there is a certain LED notifications, but some others are not. And this is difficult for someone with hearing impairment, because they do not know how many messages do they have unread or calls and answered. The volume, it's very important. This should be customized. It is also useful to have a mono signal sound for all the users with hearing assistance, especially when we are receiving them through different channels. For example, it usually happens to me when I see or listen to some sort of a whispering. I don't really distinguish the different types of sounds. Now, how about compatibility with auditive prostheses? These mobile devices shall be compatible with hearing aid or cochlear implants, allowing the introduction of an external device. The problem comes with different magnetic loops, but ideally the mobile phones should have a jack entry in order to introduce this loop. Now, regarding compatibility with hearing aid, the US has recently passed a new act. Mobile phones have to be M3 or M4 to be compatible with a microphone. For example, if the mobile phone rings, I'll just have to take it and I won't have to change the position. The telecoil is the other compatibility. The classification should be T3 or T4. This should be specified on the mobile phone box or the user's manual. After reading the analysis of the different mobile phones, I've realized that Spain does not provide much information about the compatibility of mobile phones, and it is difficult to look for it. You have to Google it constantly, and sometimes you don't really know whether they are compatible or not. And this is an issue of paramount importance for people with impairment. We can test it, but if you're going to purchase a mobile phone, how can you know whether it's compatible with your prostheses or not? The other criteria is the instant messaging. The device should be compatible with the instant messaging, for example, SMS, chats, MMS, or any other type of message. Nowadays, this is rather easy. Most mobile phones are compatible with this instant messaging. When it comes to video calls, the mobile device shall allow you to start a video call, and this is useful for people with hearing impairment who'd rather use sign language in communicating. There are certain mobile phones with a pre-integrated function in those, but some other mobile phones require you to buy or install an additional app. Ideally, every single smartphone could allow you to have this built-in application. I'm going to talk about the user-friendliness. One of the main criteria, it's the different buttons to hang out or to respond to the call. Certain mobile phones are not tactile. To answer, to the right; to hang out, to the left. One has to be green, the other one has to be red, because this is easy for the individuals with memory loss. This could be easily identified. It is important that the hangout button only has one function, just to use it when talking, to avoid confusion, especially for those memory loss users. Another criterion used is that the menu can be customized. The options menu has to be used easily. It really has to be user-friendly, and ideally it should include certain images. Another criterion are the standard icons and symbols, which have to meet the regulation and comply with it. Ideally, we should implement well-known, widely recognized symbols. The drawings for the system config, voice controls, and so on have to follow the same design principles, because nowadays many smartphones are marketed every day, and we are constantly changing, and it might be too frustrating to learn each and every device. However, if the icons and the symbols are the same, it'd be easier and people would be more than happy to change and buy new devices. How about the customized contact agenda or the phone list? Every contact should have an image. So, for example, if we have one individual with memory loss, they will know who are they calling. The best thing is to program the mobile phones that everything appears on the home page and avoiding navigating the menu to look for a phone call. The text and the wording should be easily understandable. All the documents related to the config should be clear and simple. And as much as possible, we shall avoid using complex wording, technical specifications, and grammar errors. For those with cognitive impairment, it is important to include examples and explanatory images. And finally, add an accessible documentation. Documentation needs to be in one accessible content for our users to access it easily with an assistive browser. Thank you very much. This is the end of my presentation. I'm going to give the floor to my colleague. Okay? The interpreter apologizes, but there isn't any sound in the booth. Either the speaker is not using the microphone or there is a technical mistake that we'll try to solve as soon as possible.
¿Ya sí? Vale. Que decía que por la hora que es, creo que la mayoría de vosotros estáis esperando.
Since it's already almost 2 o'clock, most of you must be very hungry. My colleague gave a very theoretical presentation. I'd like to be more interactive. My name is Fabiola Isabel Avila. I work in the accessibility department in TechnoSite under the Fundosa group of the ONCE Foundation. I am going to talk about the visual and physical interaction. Yesterday, when I was chatting to one of my friends and colleagues, and she asked me, Fabiola, what are you going to talk about tomorrow? And I said, accessibility in mobile devices. What? What are you talking about? And that led me to think that accessibility in mobile devices does not exist. So far, I do not know any single mobile phone that's accessible. From my point of view, a mobile phone shall comply with universal principle design and design for all. If they call it a smartphone, that is so wrong. Smart, in English, as you all know, means intelligent. We call them intelligent phones. And it's everything but intelligent. And I'll prove this to you. The Drt4all2013, the first mobile phone with Firefox mobile system. If you click on General, nothing's accessible. The Firefox developers didn't implement absolutely anything. They completely forgot about accessibility. And I just want to make clear, accessibility is not only for people with impairments. Accessibility means design for all. Universal design, not only for people with impairments. Let's be clear about this. Now, regarding the visual interaction, as I said, someone with a visual impairment, if they hear about the ZTOP, they can't buy it because it doesn't have a screen reader, it doesn't have a zoom, it doesn't have a typography zooming option, nothing at all. On the iPhone, you've got the screen reader, the voiceover. Steve Jobs, the late Steve Jobs, he thought about blind people. Why? Because he was the biggest or the first technological giant who included a screen reader on their systems. It is the support or aid product par excellence for the blind, for the visually impaired people using mobile devices. If we are using mobile devices, but if we haven't fully integrated the screen reader, that is a very bad starting point. Like Google, guys, I believe that it wasn't until the 4.1 version that they realized that they had to introduce the so-called talk bulk, which I'm sure you're familiar with it. I'm sure you've heard about the talk bulk in Google. It looks like a clown voice. If you are blind and you have to be constantly listening to this dreadful voice, it's horrendous. So the visually impaired people, what do they do today? They use iPhones. That's it. Because if you have to be listening to this dreadful, funny voice every single day, you'll just rather use iPhone instead of Android. I'm going to talk about the visual part because, as Natalie explained, within the visual impairment group, we've got different groups. Apple, with the new iOS 7, they've completely ruined the low vision profile. I don't know what happened with Mr. Tim Cook. Visual design is not incompatible with visual impairment. I have some colleagues in my department, they haven't updated their iPhones to the latest iOS 7. No, they haven't. Why? Because the visual design, it really is dreadful. If you click 3 times on the home menu, you can use any support tool, and they can't do it because they have a white backdrop. When they click on SMS and they just want to click on the keyboard, they cannot read the QWERTY keyboard. The font is too thin. So if you click on General, Adjustments, Accessibility for 2007, they've put bolted letters. You can see it slightly better. But again, visually, it's dreadful. My question is, are these really smartphones? Because if in previous versions to iOS 7, completely visually impaired people were delighted, why are you setting them apart now? Why did you forget about them? Is design more important than accessibility? That's not a very good starting point. A friend of mine says accessibility is not a patch. It's a key cornerstone requirement for this. Now, what else do we assess visually? We want distinctive buttons that can be properly distinguished. If I take the Samsung smartphone, I click on a home. To the left and to the right, you will see 2 buttons, which are not hardware buttons. These are software buttons, but they turned off sometimes. I no longer see them. Can you distinguish this or tell these apart? Some users cannot, even if it's in fluorescent colors. So they might argue, how about the learning curve? Fine, but if I pick up the Xperia Sony, you see? The back button is to the left, and in Samsung it is to the right. We are talking about 2 different manufacturers, but we are talking about the same Android operating system. Visually impaired users are lost in this nightmare. How about the plus and minus buttons in iPhone? When you touch it for the first time, you think it's to increase or decrease the volume, but that isn't the case. You can do something else, can't you? You can take a picture if you click on the minus button. What does this have to do? I mean, it has nothing to do. it depends on the context. If you have opened your photo app, you can click on minus. This isn't clear enough. What else can we assess in a mobile device? Physical interaction. The greatest support for a visually impaired person is a screen reader. It has to be integrated. You shouldn't have to download it and install it yourself. Someone in a wheelchair. For them, their support tool, it's the voice recognition. I'm not talking about Siri. Siri is not as comprehensive as the voice recognition. I'd like the voice recognition for someone with physical impairment. So far, this does not exist. What developers these are? They are thinking, yes, about visually impaired people, but they are completely forgetting about physically impaired people. When you go to your mobile device store and you ask them, how could I introduce my SIM card? It is very difficult. And you might argue, well, you just have to introduce it once and then you forget about it. But how about the first time? Well, you're not self-reliant, you need help, because you really need a clip to be introduced in the tiny hole. How about the Xperia Z Zoni? I need to introduce my nail into this little hole in order to open this thing here. What the hell is this? Are these Sony developers thinking about physically impaired people? Not at all. This is not accessible at all. This is not a smartphone to my thinking. When they are associating physical capabilities like intelligence to devices, I don't know why they do it. I'd like to applaud Apple's decision because they are thinking about physically impaired people. Do you remember the assistive touch in Apple before the iOS 7? If you go to adjustments, general accessibility, and then assistive touch, that allows you to increase or decrease the volume without the physical need to touch the buttons or to block your or unlock the screen without the need to touch it. But they've taken a step forward, and once again I'd like to applaud their initiative. They've invented the control button that I'd like to show you. You go to adjustments, general accessibility, and motor skills, for example. Please do activate it. Before you activate it, automatic exploration, and click on this tab, activate the tab. If you give it some time, you see the scrolling it's doing. This is the button control that allows you to connect it to a switch, which will then connect itself to the wheelchair, and just by clicking one button in your wheelchair you can navigate and browse in your smartphone and use it. And this is very important for physically impaired people. Again, these are only patches because physically impaired people, as I said at the very beginning, they really need the voice recognition. They just don't want to touch anything because they are physically impaired. They want to use their voices. What else? This is a Nokia. When they launched the iPhone, this is very ergonomic because it allows you to move my thumb around to to swipe this thumb with no problems whatsoever. But if you pick up a Sony, this might be horrible. They didn't take into account the ergonomic design of your hand. I find it very difficult to move it around. Both the dimensions and the weight are very important in terms of physical interaction. And if you compare this with the Android or iPhone, this is dreadful, because not only do I have to move it upwards and backwards, and if you want to take a picture, you see how difficult it is. This was only a very practical explanation. I believe in universal principle and in accessibility for all, but this hasn't been implemented so far. People aren't taking accessibility seriously. We still have a long way to go, one road that we still haven't started. We'd like to foster a full interaction between the huge problems facing impaired people and ourselves. We need to raise awareness among manufacturers and mobile operators. Thank you very much indeed.
Sí, es verdad, preguntas en el último.
Tienen preguntas, la parte.
You have questions? Do you have questions? I have a lot of difficulty understanding here, so if you could please pose the questions to her.
Bien, gracias por la exposición, ambas.
Thank you very much for your explanation. I am going to pose a question, and I hope it is adjusted to your knowledge. To what extent, because you have talked about iPhone, so to what extent do you know if it is the most widespread used device by people with low vision? We apologize, but the speaker is not using a microphone. We therefore cannot offer a translation. I can answer, yes. If we take into account that 3GS iPhone with the voiceover, the screen reader, and integrated zoom in the OS was launched in 2009, I think that as it stands today, the majority of blind people and with the residual vision use iPhone. The majority of them do. Nevertheless, not everybody can afford to acquire such an elite device, even though they did it not so well with iOS 7. So now a lot of blind people want to migrate to Android, because since the 4.1 version, the talkback facility is integrated. Yes, you can. At large, you can find blind people using iPhones. I'm Jonathan. I was involved in the first stages of a mobile, but then I moved to R&D departments. And I can tell you that last year, the NFB, which is the equivalent to ONCE in the United States, they launched a questionnaire among their affiliates and users. And out of all users, 90% said that they used iPhone. Only a few of them said that they used other platforms such as Android, but it is true that out of those 100 users interviewees, not all users were iPhone users. Many people still have Symbian, Nokia, Siemens, and they don't necessarily use the special features that the smartphone provides, and as long as the mobile device works, they stick to it.
Everything was clear? I would like to make a remark, since Fabiola is so supportive of the total voice recognition system and not the partial one as the one offered by Siri or Google Voice. I do believe in universal design too and complete accessibility. Nevertheless, I'm also a bit realistic, and I'm a developer as well as a researcher. And we do encounter problems with technical limitations. Doing a total voice recognition software that will continuously work would provide an autonomy with current batteries of 45 minutes, being optimistic. And apart from that, I've run some tests with some colleagues who are quite savvy about these issues, and we wanted to put together a voice recognition system. But there's an issue with a voice discrimination. For instance, I'm dictating, and if someone walks by saying, "Call my mama, call my mommy," then my mobile picks it up, my mobile phone picks it up. And they are smartphones, but there are technical limitations. There is just that have to do with calculus and with algorithms for discriminating this, diction, people, intonations. When Siri was launched in Spanish, for instance, many developer colleagues that worked on iPhone said that Siri understood better the Andalusian accent than the Catalonian accent, because a high percentage of developers who were working in the beta development part of Siri were from Andalusia. So there's a part of it that has to do with the fact that Siri, iOS, or Android undergo improvements, for instance, or drawbacks in iOS 7. And I must say that in the beta phase for the development of iOS 7, I reported over 180 drawbacks. But the directors of Apple say that this needs to be launched on the 17th September, even if engineers haven't had enough time, because it is a highly detailed project. You detect an error, you notify, the engineer traces it, he requests more information, you send it, then the engineer makes a parallel check, and then you give feedback again. And the last time I talked to an Apple engineer, I said to him, listen, it took me so long to report on this because I have a personal life. I don't report constantly. I'm not in front of the computer constantly. So the market is an enemy of accessibility. And technological limitations are also an enemy for accessibility, even though they could be powerful allies if well identified. Without any more comments from me, I would like to thank you for this opportunity. It's not that I'm a firm believer on development for all, but rather development for each one of us, accessibility for each one of us. There are incompatibilities that need to be taken into account because they exist. My aunt, for instance, is aged and she doesn't see well. We gave her as present a very large screen Samsung. She's happy with it because the keys are very large, and this is incompatible with having a handheld device and managing the screen with your thumb. So how should we do it? Should we deter this elderly person from having a better screen for her own purposes, and in that case the other person who needs to do these things with one single hands couldn't have access to these features. Or, as a previous colleague said, we need to develop voice recognition systems that can recognize Andalusian accents, Basque accents, and Catalonian accents. From the technological point of view, this is almost impossible. Economically, in a cost-effective manner, we should develop a series of things that are not objectively justified. If you really want to speak Andalusian, perhaps there should be an available app for Andalusian, but it doesn't mean that we should force everyone to speak with an Andalusian accent. You want me to answer? I agree with you. The existing mobile technology is quite nice. But I want to think that we cannot even envisage what will come around in the future. Some things are considered impossible right now, as Jonathan Chacon said, but it will be made possible in the future. In 2009, if a blind person had been told that they were going to have a touch screen and a voice recognition system in their smartphone, they couldn't have believed it. And now it's become a reality. So voice recognition seems to be a technological limitation right now. Nevertheless, it will become a reality, and I do believe in it. And I do believe in user-centered design, but for everyone. Hello, good morning. I'm a blind person and I use iPhone. I wanted to answer to a question that was posed earlier. You provided some figures, and the reality is that the majority of totally blind people with low vision or very low vision are using iPhone as it stands today. Nevertheless, reality arose at that given moment in time because we had no other option. Now there are other options. Even though perhaps Android is not so well advanced, they are making a lot of progress, but currently perhaps it's not tantamount to what iPhone can open. But for instance, if you had a Nokia running on Symbian and you had it all well adapted with screen readers and so on, and if it broke, you decided whether to buy a second-hand telephone or request it from someone, or to spend a large amount of money on a smartphone, which is an iPhone, which is very nice, and I'm very happy with it. Just like many blind colleagues, we do many things thanks to it. Nevertheless, I obtain a very high performance from it, and I use it for many things. But some people, even if they're not blind, they won't manage to obtain such a high performance. Perhaps they wouldn't need an iPhone. Perhaps they could just spend 200 euros on a smartphone. But back at that time, we had no option. It is true that the majority of blind people are using iPhone because it is true that this company really fostered accessibility before anyone else did it. But let's not fool ourselves. They did it because in the US things work differently. Public bids are different. Legislation is also different. Well, many issues played a role in this, but this was beneficial for blind people and for people with other type of impairments or disability, because Apple really fostered this, and not acknowledging it would be really unfair. But truth be told, now other options are being made available, and perhaps 2 years down the road we will be having a completely different position. I will use something that I don't believe in as a starting point. Nevertheless, it will be used as a starting point. If we consider iPhone to be accessible, and economically it's not all that accessible, are we saying that accessibility should be expensive? And I don't believe in that statement, but are we saying that accessibility should really be expensive? Is it really all that expensive to add in accessibility? As it stands today, I think that accessibility is expensive, but I really liked what Marie-Claire said, because what she means to say is that low-cost technologies should also be accessible, and they are not. If I buy the ZT Open, I think that costs 69 euros or 63 euros. But if I spend a lot of money and I buy an iPhone, the accessibility model is already embedded. So if you're taking a social approach on this, that is very important, because it is a right, but it's also a requirement. And it's not complied with, not even in the most expensive devices. And that's the only answer I can give you. It's me again. Just to make some remarks. We're talking about software accessibility, which is the support product for the purposes of accessibility that can be implemented through software. It would be cost effective, very, very cost effective, if it's taken as a requirement when it comes to designing the final product. The more you delay it in the process, it becomes more and more expensive, and there comes a moment that a blind person must pay $1,000 for using Windows with accessibility enabled, with the voice reader. It is true that the starting point is a bit more expensive, because that production of physical components, it's destined for a minority public. Nevertheless, if we take as a starting point that there must be a compliance with ergonomics, accessibility and compatibility features, which is something different. And by the way, Sony makes it more important for the device to be beautiful than for a person to be able to grab it. So that's what makes things more expensive. So we are starting from a statement, which is that large companies and everything that has to do with universal design and accessibility, well, they consider this a superfluous expense. So they lack criteria and knowledge. Just to make a comparison, in architecture universities, there are a lot of professors who say that steps are beautiful. And I quote, I'm quoting a professor from Seville by saying this, and I told him, listen, why don't you tie both of your shoes laces, and when you finish jumping up 26 steps that I actually jumped down just at once with one try, please say again to me that steps are beautiful when you manage to do that. So in terms of physical design, hardware design, architecture, we are departing from some old-fashioned concepts. I wanted to delve deeper into the economic issue regarding whether or not accessibility is expensive or not. The data that we are obtaining from projects that actually weigh out how much it costs and what the benefits are, whether accessibility levels are guaranteed for some products and services, well, up to now, the real data go to show that it is more expensive to tackle projects under that philosophy. But in this equation, something is not adding up, which is that in some cases, they don't want to introduce in the equation the social benefits. Those of us working in this environment that has to do with that has more to do with social issues highly value this, but those that work on the other side of the coin really underestimate this component. In reality, these matters converge in social culture. It is a matter of awareness in society, so people need to be convinced of something. A few years ago, some days you wouldn't have even argued regarding some points that are taken for granted today. A few years ago, this was a battle, and now we take for granted that this is how it should be. And we'll see later on how to tackle it economically. But that's something that needs to be taken into account. So at the end of the day, this is where all these matters really lay. We need to foster and comply with these requirements. We're talking about how good mobile devices are in terms of features and performance compared with a few years ago, and possibly a few years from now they will have improved too. iOS 7 is a step back regarding some features. This is something that was mentioned in some of the panels yesterday, but that's something that we constantly see. Some manufacturers make step forward, some manufacturers make step backwards. But social benefits are something that need to be included in the equation, and if the progress does not happen in society as a whole, the progress will be quite slow. Hello. Regarding the economic issue, I wanted to differentiate between open source economy and standard open source technology, and standard technology. Accessibility implemented in Apple products is also specified by the economic investment. At the same time, I know that Apple has a patent on how to open up the screen, so that involves that the knowledge used to create that accessible technology is not accessible. That is to say, we couldn't take on that feature and implement it in another technology. It's almost like imposing a patent on a physical gesture. The patent is on the way you open up the screen on that device. On the other hand, it is also my understanding that systems that rely on open source codes, such as Firefox, even though I'm not too acquainted with this, I think that depends on the developers' community. So if people with a disability are not participating in those communities, then the problem is somewhere else, not so much in the economic field. I think you hit the nail on the head. Last week I was reading an article, and the writer said that people with disabilities who have problems with iOS 7 need to address Apple so that Apple becomes aware of those problems. So if we are disabled users and we don't make contact with the manufacturer, who will contact them? So I do believe in the users' communities. I do believe in what you said. And I think it would be of uttermost importance. I don't know how it should be done, but if this ZT Open is not accessible, what can disabled people do? Should we do a research group within the research unit of Firefox so that they can get their hands on it? Should we write Apple directly. So why don't they create a group within Apple formed by people with disability? Because if this was a step back regarding the features offered to people with low visibility, then they're failing in doing their task. And in 2009, it was a landmark for people with disability, with visual disability, what Apple did. So what have they left it aside? So I do think that what you said is very relevant. I would like to make a reflection in line with the remarks made. For those of us who are on a diet, let's rejoice, because it seems that today we're not going to break for lunch. Since you're talking about it, developers must be clear as to the fact that whenever our creations, become a business, they will be more successful. To a certain extent, we are leaving aside the concept of being accessible, entailing a very high cost. In all websites, in all forums, they do things in order to create business, because business is the support base for everything else. That will not always be the case, but whenever it is possible, we should take that into account. It costs a lot of effort to these things, and if it turns into a business, then things roll better. So I am advocating this concept. Applications, accessible applications, are a business because we have access to more people, because we have more customers, and that with that approach things run more smoothly. If there are no further questions, I would like to tell you that the cocktail is going to take place in the auditorium. Thank you very much for participating. This is a note from the interpreters to the transcribers. Thank you very much for your patience and for your collaboration.